Hi there. This video goes along with Unit 3 in the Gold Experience A2 Plus book. Today we're going to be talking about a little bit about short stories, telling them and writing them. But first of all, I wanted to ask, have you ever noticed on the front cover of your book, there's a page that looks like this. And at the bottom, you see that QR code. When you scan that QR code, will take you to a page that looks like this. And if you can create an account and sign in, you might find some interesting and maybe fun things to do to go along with the lessons that we're learning at school. So today we're looking at Unit 3, read all about it. I want to know, what is the best story you've heard? Think a little bit. Do they usually make you laugh? I wonder what it is about the stories that make us laugh, that we really enjoy. Have you ever thought about that? Do you think that you could be a good storyteller if you learned some simple skills with storytelling? Well, let's talk about some ideas today. First of all, when you're telling a story, you should say what your story is about. You should help the listener follow the action. Sometimes you can do that with questions or interactive type activities. You can interest the audience and include direct questions. And when you're telling a story, you should never look at the floor or sound bored, but you've got to have an interesting voice and maybe make some motions with your hands and make eye contact with your audience. These are great ways to keep your audience interested in your story when you're speaking. And remember, when you tell your story, that usually you want to end with what you remember about that experience, some kind of closing sentence. And we usually tell our stories in past tense. Okay? I have a few things I also want to tell you about a good story. When you want to read a story, you often want to keep reading. You don't want to stop. Have you ever read a book that just is so interesting you don't want to stop reading it? And usually it's very easy to follow. And think about the interesting and descriptive language, the adjectives that are used in the good stories, the good books you've read. They give you enough details so that you can have a picture in your head about what is happening in this story. Either when you're telling the story or when you're writing the story, make sure to include details about the places, the weather, the colors, the size. That will help your audience to understand and make pictures in their own mind about what's happening. And also, always remember a good ending. Now, here's some useful language. This is on page 39 in your book. In the introduction, it can be helpful to say something like, "This is a story about," or "I'm going to tell you about something funny that," or "This is a true story that happened to me when." These are good starters for the story that will captivate your audience. Now, some words you can use or phrases that you can use to describe actions are suddenly, or soon after that, or then, a little later, or in the end. And finally, the last two things are including the listener, questions that you can ask directly to the listener. What do you think happened next? Can you imagine what I did after that? Can you guess what happened next? And finally, to close the story, end the story, talk about what you remember. When I think back to what happened, and then you fill in the blank, or after what happened to me, or after that happened. These are good ways to end your stories. Now, looking at these pictures, you can imagine what might happen in these kinds of places. Which of these photos would be a good location for a short story? I don't know, it depends on what might be happening at the beach or in the woods, maybe something scary. I think all of these places could be great places for, or maybe even a lighthouse. So don't forget what makes a good story as we think about writing a story too. And finally, I want you to remember that you can make your story interesting if you can talk about people's feelings. That's one of those details I was talking about. Or you could use short sentences with an exclamation mark. Tell about what people said or thought in the story, in the event. That's more details. And start your sentences in different ways. It's always good when you're writing to start your sentences in different ways. Don't always use the same starter, like I said this, I said this, I went, I talked, or things like that. Try to change up the beginnings of your sentences. So if you want examples of this type of language, you could look at exercise 4. There's a paragraph. Read that to help you get some ideas about writing a good story. Now, finally, strong adjectives are really good to use, but you have to remember that a strong adjective includes the meaning very. So we don't normally say very fantastic because fantastic already means very good, or very bad can replace terrible, but we don't say very terrible. Another idea might be gorgeous. That means very pretty or very beautiful. Or in this example, impossible. Well, that means very hard. So you wouldn't say very impossible. You would either say very hard or impossible. Strong adjectives are a good part of storytelling. So try to find some in our exercises and learn to use them in your stories. I hope this helps you become a better storyteller and a story writer.